The vote was already decided before I sat down. I knew it 3 days before it happened when Paul Henley called me over a scrambled channel, his voice careful and quiet in the way of a man who has already made peace with something difficult and is now just managing what comes after it. He laid it out plainly. He told me what the count would be. He told me to read the prepared statement into the official record, ensure Earth's formal protest was logged with the correct procedural references, and then come home. I told him I would handle it. That was technically true. The Galactic Council chamber sits at the center of Relay Station Keth. Structure so enormous that when they gave me the architectural tour 6 years ago, I nodded politely and retained none of the numbers, because numbers that large stop meaning anything after a certain point. The ceiling curves upward into a manufactured haze that the lighting system uses to create the impression of an open sky, because the council's designers apparently decided every attending species should feel simultaneously comforted and watched. The floor is polished to a mirror finish. The seats rise in tiered rings. 47 delegations, each section calibrated for the atmospheric and gravitational needs of whoever was sitting there. Some tiers were behind sealed glass. One was filled entirely with a slow, amber-colored liquid in which the heaven delegation conducted all their affairs with unhurried grace. My chair was 3 and 2 tall. My feet did not touch the floor. 6 years of attending sessions in this chamber, I had mentioned the chair in writing exactly once and received a response from the facilities coordination office informing me the matter had been forwarded to the relevant subcommittee. That was 4 years ago. Some things you simply learn to live with. Owen Dale sat to my left, my junior aide, 26 and genuinely sharp, new enough that his face still expressed things without his permission. To my right sat Nina Cross, our legal attaché, a woman whose particular stillness had been earned over a long career in rooms where things fell apart, and who had decided long ago that stillness was the only sane response to rooms like that. Counselor Bream of the Avathi Collective. Read the charges. The Avathi communicate in layered harmonics, and my translation implant converted it into a precise human voice that always sounded mildly disappointed in the state of everything. The charges took 11 minutes. I timed them. Destabilizing, unpredictable, incapable of sustained diplomatic restraint, disturbingly creative in the application of conflict resolution. And the last one, the one that sent a visible ripple through the back row of our delegation, repeatedly solving problems in ways that create significantly larger problems for all surrounding civilizations in the affected region. A sound moved through our back row, not a laugh, the exact shape of one. Swallowed. I kept my eyes forward. Ambassador Veth of the Korali hegemony rose from the central dais. The Korali have never in any part of their recorded history been prey to anything, and it shows in every movement they make. Unhurried, gravitational, certain that the space ahead of them will arrange itself to accommodate their arrival. Veth had 6 arms held in the formal Korali arrangement that translates roughly to, you should be listening very carefully to what comes next. His voice needed no amplification. It moved through the chamber and through the walls and through my sternum, rich and deep and entirely certain of itself. He looked at me when he started speaking, not at the delegation, not at the Official Earth seal on our table at me. He had read my file before coming in and he wanted me to know he had. He built his case the way careful prosecutors build cases, not with emotion but with accumulation. One established fact laid beside another, then another, until the conclusion felt not like a decision, but like gravity. He talked about the Council's patience about Earth's repeated failures to meet the basic expectations of civilized conduct, about the weight of 47 civilizations, choosing restraint again and again, while one small planet on the outer edge of map space seemed constitutionally unable to do the same. He said, civilized space is a living thing. Earth has been a wound in it long enough. He paused. The pause was as precise as everything else about him. You are cast out forever. The chamber went still. Not quiet still, the specific stillness of 47 delegations waiting for something to break. The prepared statement was in my lapel screen. Paul had written most of it. Our legal team had revised it 4 times. Over 3 days, it was correct and dignified and covered every point. If I read it now, Earth's formal objection would be part of the permanent galactic record, and whatever happened next, diplomatic historians would have a clean document to reference. I set the screen face down on the table. Owen stopped breathing. Nina did not move. I looked at Ambassador Veth. His 6 arms were still. His posture said, I am waiting for you to acknowledge what has just happened to you. I smiled. Not the one I used in rooms like this. Normally, I know that smile well. 6 years of wearing it, the one that says, I respect the process, I understand the hierarchy, I'm not thinking anything that concerns you. That smile is a tool, and I had used it in so many rooms across 6 years that it felt less like an expression and more like a piece of clothing. This was my mother's smile, the one she wore in hospital corridors when an administrator was carefully explaining why something could not be done, and she had already spent her morning figuring out exactly how to do it without him. I said, yeah, okay. 2 words. The silence shifted. It stopped waiting and started trying to process something it did not have a category for. I stood, picked up my screen without turning it over, pushed the too tall chair back from the table, gave Ambassador Veth one nod, the kind you give at the end of a meeting you have already moved past, and walked to the door. Owen caught up with me in the corridor, his footsteps twice the speed of mine. Mara, he said. Owen, you were supposed to read the statement. I know. Paul is watching on 14 different monitors. He knows my frequency. He is going to call you. Then he will leave a message. The corridor curved ahead of us. The station hum thickened as we moved toward the docking section, behind the sealed chamber doors. The session was already resuming. The vote would be counted. Earth would be formally and permanently removed from the Galactic Council framework, stripped of trade, protections, defense agreements, communications, infrastructure access, and every treaty that had stood between humanity and being treated as a resource problem rather than a civilization. No more council oversight. No more sanctions review boards. No more quarterly compliance reports filed in triplicate for research activities that the Oversight Committee decided made them nervous. No more rules. Not their rules anyway. Why did you smile? Owen asked. I thought about Dr. Petra Crane, about the memo she had sent me 14 months ago. 8 dense pages that I had read twice, in the same evening, and then forwarded to Paul with 3 words in the subject line, "Read this now," about the research proposal sitting suppressed databases across 12 Earth institutions, filed away and held quiet for 40 years because every time one of them surfaced, the Council's oversight committee would flag it, threaten sanctions, and Earth would back down, because backing down had always been calculated as cheaper than the alternative. The drawer. The very, very full drawer. Because, I said, they just handed us the scissors and told us not to run. Owen was quiet for a moment, working through it. I don't follow that, he said. You will, I said, give it about a year. We kept walking, the docking section opened ahead of us, wide and lit, and already feeling like the beginning of something that did not yet have a name. 6 months after the expulsion, I was stationed on Luna Base 7 in a repurposed cargo bay that someone had optimistically labeled Conference Room D. The label was on a piece of white paper taped to the wall. The cargo bay still smelled like machine oil and pressurized seal compound, which I had come to find oddly comforting. My desk was a folding table. My chair was the right height. I had 2 monitors, 1 mug of coffee going cold on my left, and a budget proposal open on my screen that had a line item in it so large that the first time I read it, I thought the decimal point was in the wrong place. It was not in the wrong place. The budget proposal was for something called the Provisional Unconventional Physics Division. Pre-expulsion, this division had not existed because the Council's Scientific Governance Treaty explicitly prohibited research activities falling under what they termed gratuitous spatial manipulation, a category broad enough to cover about a third of the theoretical physics papers that Earth researchers had been quietly filing away since the 2060s. Post-expulsion, there was no scientific governance treaty, there was no treaty of any kind. There was only a budget line, and the budget line was very, very large. I approved it and moved to the next item on my screen. Then I went back and looked at the number again. Then I approved it again and moved on. Dr. Petra Crane arrived at 9:00 in the morning carrying a tablet, a thermos of her own coffee, and the particular expression of someone who had spent years being politely told to wait and has recently stopped waiting. She was 53 with the kind of precise, unhurried movements that belong to people who have learned to think 3 steps ahead of every conversation they walk into. She had been head of the Earth Sciences Theoretical Research Archive for 11 years. She was the person who had sent me the memo. She sat down across from me, set her thermos on the table, and put her tablet between us. You approved the budget, she said. I did. Without reviewing the project list. I reviewed the project list, I said. I did not understand most of it, but I reviewed it. She almost smiled. I am going to show you 3 things today. The first 2 will confuse you. The third one will make you need to sit down. I am already sitting. You will need to sit down more, she said. The first project was a propulsion study, not new propulsion technology exactly, but a theoretical framework for restructuring how existing FTL drive systems process spatial coordinates. The Council had forbidden this class of research in 2041, under a treaty clause that Earth's delegation at the time had signed, without fully understanding what they were signing. The theoretical upside, Petra explained with the calm tone of someone describing a moderate improvement to a filing system rather than a fundamental reorientation of interstellar travel, was a speed increase of somewhere between 30 and 50% and a fuel reduction of roughly 40%. The paper had been sitting in the archive drawer since 2063. How long would development take? I asked. We started 6 weeks ago, she said. We have a working simulation. We will have a physical prototype within 14 months. She moved to the second project. I did not understand the second project. It involved something called recursive field compression, which Petra explained twice at decreasing levels of technical complexity until she arrived at an analogy involving a folded piece of paper and a very long corridor, at which point I understood it well enough to grasp the implications. The implications were significant. I asked how long this one had been in the drawer. Since 2058, she said. I looked at her. She looked back. How many papers are in the drawer? Petra. She picked up her thermos. 412. Classified theoretical documents across 19 research institutions. Approximately 200 of those are immediately actionable, given current engineering capabilities. She paused. We have already begun on 61 of them. In 6 weeks. We had the proposals written, she said. We were simply not allowed to act on them. She moved to the third project. She did not explain it the way she had explained the others. She just turned the tablet to face me and let me read. I read for about 3 minutes. Then I stood up, walked to the cargo bay wall, put one hand on it and stood there for a moment. Then I came back and sat down, which technically meant I had stood up and sat back down, which Petra had apparently predicted. This is not theoretical, I said. No, she said, it stopped being theoretical about 4 years ago. We have been waiting for clearance to run a full-scale test. What were you waiting for? She looked at me steadily. Someone to tell us we were allowed. I thought about 47 delegations in a tier chamber. I thought about a 6-armed ambassador with a voice like a cathedral and a certainty that the thing he was doing was the right thing. Run the test, I said. She picked up her thermos and stood. We ran it this morning, she said. I came here to show you the results. She left the tablet. I sat alone in the cargo bay that smelled like machine oil with cold coffee on my left and a tablet full of results that the most advanced scientific body in the Galactic Council had spent 40 years making sure no one on Earth was allowed to produce. 2 weeks later, a back-channel query arrived from the Corali hegemony. The official language was diplomatic and indirect, the kind of careful phrasing. That means the sender wants information, but does not want to admit they want it. The query asked, in general terms and with much formal courtesy, whether Earth could provide any clarification regarding the increased communications traffic originating from human space, the nature of what appeared to be new construction projects at 6 sites across the solar system, and whether Earth intended at some future point to re-engage with the Council on the subject of its current activities. They had expected, I understood clearly, to check on us in 6 months and find a civilization quietly falling apart. No trade protections, no defense guarantees, isolated. Instead, they were getting construction noise. My supervisor, a man named Greg Ash, who had the thankless job of reviewing my official communications before they went out, sent me the query with a note asking me to draft a careful and diplomatically neutral response. I drafted the response. 4 sentences, the last one read, "Nothing currently underway in human space is a matter of concern for the Galactic Council, as the Council's authority over human activities was formally and permanently terminated at the expulsion session 6 months ago." I sent it before Greg could review it. He called me 40 seconds later. I let it go to voicemail. The response was sent. The drawer was open and in a cargo bay on Luna Base 7. Dr. Petra Crane and 400 scientists who had been waiting 20 years for someone to say go were already running tests, numbered 62 through 71. We had not even started on the second shelf yet. 18 months after the expulsion, I had a new title. It was Liaison for External Consequences, which sounded, as I explained to my mother over a bad video call that kept cutting out, like a demotion invented by someone who had given up on titling things. My mother, who had been a trauma nurse for 31 years and had therefore heard every creative euphemism for a bad situation that the English language contained, said it sounded like I was the person they called when something happened that was everyone's problem. She was not wrong. My office was on the New Earth diplomatic station, which had been constructed at a location that was technically just outside the boundary of Council map space, which meant it was technically an open territory, which meant we had built it there deliberately, and everyone who mattered understood why. The office had a window. The window looked out at approximately 400 km of construction activity. It was, I had come to feel, the most accurate possible view from any office I had ever occupied. The Havari incident came in at 6:40 in the morning. A Havari trading convoy, 12 vessels, had been navigating a corridor route near the edge of human space that they had been using for the better part of 30 years. The corridor passed through a section of space that had historically contained pirate staging station, which the Council had technically prohibited but practically tolerated because addressing it would have required a unanimous vote that the 3 civilizations who occasionally found it useful would never agree to. The station had been there for decades. Everyone knew it was there. Everyone had decided, quietly and with mutual understanding, to know it was there and do nothing. The convoy arrived at the corridor to find the station was no longer there. Not damaged, not abandoned, gone. The debris field suggested something had been very thoroughly, very deliberately, and very recently removed. The convoy filed a report with the Council Navigation Authority asking who had authorized the removal operation and what procedures had been followed. Council Navigation Authority routed the query to Earth's External Consequences Office because Earth was the only civilization in the relevant sector who had not been asked and was, in their estimation, the most likely candidate. My official response: no authorization was required or sought. The structure in question was removed by Earth Technical Teams as part of a standard corridor. Safety initiative. The Galactic Council's jurisdiction over human activities, including activities in open space adjacent to human territory, was formally terminated at the expulsion session. We wish the HFY convoy a safe passage. 3 separate council members filed formal notes of concern. I filed them in a folder I had created. For formal notes of concern, the folder was already getting full. Ambassador Veth requested an off-record meeting 2 days later. The request came through an unofficial channel routed 3 times to obscure its origin, which meant someone on Veth's staff had spent real effort making sure it could not be characterized as an official council communication. He wanted to meet quietly without it being a meeting. I agreed. We met in a neutral section of transit hub Vane, a commercial way station used by 16 different species for resupply stops. I got there early and found a sitting area with a working vending machine, which I noted with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose request for vending machine access had been ignored for 6 years. I bought something with too much sugar in it and ate half of it before Veth arrived. He arrived with 2 aides who waited outside the sitting area while he came in alone. He sat across from me, his 6 arms settled into a posture I had not seen on him before, one that did not appear in any of the diplomatic reference guides I had been trained on. I filed it mentally and kept my expression relaxed. He looked, I thought, like a man who had prepared what he was going to say and was now deciding whether to say it. Delegate Voss, he said. I am not a delegate anymore, I said. You handle that, but Mara is fine. A pause. Mara, he said, I wanted to speak informally about certain developments. I know, I said. There are some in the council who are concerned by the pace of activity in human space, not formally concerned. Informally. I understand the distinction. There are also some who feel that the current situation, while the result of a legitimate council process, may have produced outcomes that were not fully anticipated. I ate the other half of the thing from the vending machine. Is that a way of saying the expulsion did not produce the outcome you expected? Veth was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, not quieter, lower, a different register. The council would be open to exploring what a provisional consultation framework might look like, not re-entry, not a formal reversal, a frame. Discussions. I will pass that along, I said. I would ask that you consider the request seriously. I take everything seriously, I said. Ask Owen Dale, he will tell you. Veth looked at me, something moved across his expression, brief and unreadable. You are not what I expected, he said. Ambassador, I said, that is the most honest thing anyone in the station has said to me in 18 months. After Veth left, I sat in the transit hub sitting area and thought about 3 things. Specifically, the 3 things that I knew were keeping the council's internal communications running at 3 times their normal volume based on intercept summaries that our signals team sent me every morning. The first thing, Earth's new FTL corridor network built without council routing permissions, anchored at 6 points across human space and operating at a transit speed that was 41% faster than the standard council maintained corridors. We were not charging access fees. We had in fact extended an open invitation to any vessel wishing to use them. Usage had increased every week for 3 months. The second thing, 4 member civilizations of the Galactic Council had, through unofficial channels, made inquiries about Earth's trade terms. Not 4 small civilizations, 4 mid-tier members with significant resource and manufacturing capacity. They had not submitted formal applications. They were asking questions, the kind of questions you ask before you submit a formal application. The third thing, Dr. Petra Crane's division had published a paper. One paper, 47 pages, published openly in every galactic scientific archive with access to the human communications network, which was now most of them, since our new FTL network carried data traffic as a secondary function. The Council's scientific review body had been attempting to replicate the paper's findings for 6 weeks. They had not yet succeeded. They had stopped publishing their replication attempts after the third failure. I thought about all 3 of these things. Then I thought about the vote 18 months ago in the count. 44 for expulsion, 3 against. 3 civilizations in that tiered chamber had voted no. I knew their names. I had memorized them. Before the session ended, sitting in that too-tall chair with my feet not touching the floor, watching the count come in 1 civilization at a time. 3 votes out of 47. 3 out of 47 had looked at the charges, looked at the proposed remedy, and said no. I had not contacted them, not once in 18 months. I had been deliberately, carefully, methodically not contacting them, but I had kept their files current. I updated them now, sitting in the transit hub vein with an empty vending machine wrapper in my hand, and I thought soon. Not yet. Soon. 2 years and 8 months after the expulsion, the Autonomous Human Compact had 14 star systems, 11 non-human member civilizations, a trade network that processed more volume per month than the entire Council's out-of-sector framework, and a combined defense arrangement that 3 separate independent military analysts had described in their assessments, using the word considerable in a tone that suggested they had considered stronger words and thought better of it. It also had a foreign secretary. That was me. I had not campaigned for the role. I'm not entirely sure how it happened. My working theory involves a very bad week. In month 19, a budget spreadsheet I built at 2:00 in the morning because I could not sleep, and someone forwarding that spreadsheet to 3 people without asking me first. By the time I noticed it had been forwarded, it had been forwarded 11 more times, and Paul Henley was calling me to say that the organizing committee wanted to know if I would accept the role. I asked if there was someone more qualified. Paul said, "You built the framework everyone is using. That seems like a qualification." I said I would think about it. He said the committee was waiting on the line. I said fine. The Compact's first full multi-species assembly was held on Earth Diplomatic Station in what had been 6 months prior, a loading dock. We had put in a real floor. We had put in chairs calibrated for 12 different species. We had put in a vending machine that worked and stocked it with things from 9 different worlds, which took 3 weeks of sourcing work, and which I considered one of our greater logistical achievements. I was a bad public speaker, and I knew I had notes on my left wrist and backup notes on my right wrist, and when I walked to the front of the room, I knocked a glass of water off the edge of the podium with my elbow, and Owen caught it from 3 feet away without spilling a drop, which felt like an omen of some kind. I looked out at the room. 11 species. Some in chairs, some in specially fitted sections, one in a contained liquid environment that we had installed along the left wall at significant expense and which had been used exactly once for a formal session and twice for what I strongly suspected was recreational swimming. Humans along the back rows and filling the center section. Lena Ford, our head negotiator, seated in the front row with her tablet open and her expression calm in the way of someone who has prepared for every possible version of this speech and is ready for whichever one shows up. I said, "Okay, so we built a thing." A small laugh moved through the human rows. 18 months ago, I said, we were formally removed from the Galactic Council with a list of reasons that included being difficult to understand. I want to address that directly. We are difficult to understand. I will not argue the point. What I will say is that being difficult to understand and being dangerous are not the same thing, and the Council spent 40 years treating them as though they were. I looked down at my wrist notes, then put my arm down. We built faster corridors because we had the idea and we were not allowed to use it. We built a research division because we had 400 papers sitting in a drawer. We built this compact because 3 civilizations looked at a vote that went 44-3 and thought that the 3 might be worth talking to. I paused. We did not set out to build an alternative to the Council. We set out to do the work we had always wanted to do, the work we had been prevented from doing, with no ceiling on how far we could take it. What you are sitting in is what that looks like after 2.5 years. I looked at the room again, the liquid environment along the left wall. Species in chairs built for shapes that were not human shapes. Lena Ford in the front row with her tablet, who had spent 6 months negotiating the compact's charter and had at one point gone 38 hours without sleep because she refused to leave the table while a clause was still unresolved. We are not replacing anything, I said. We are showing what becomes possible when you stop asking permission. The Council called an emergency session. 9 weeks later, their first emergency session in 40 years. Owen sent me the notification with a message that read, "Does this count as the moment you said it would take about a year?" I replied, "It took 2 years and 8 months, so technically I was wrong." He replied, "You were within the margin." He was right, but I did not tell him that. The session vote was on whether to open formal dialogue with the autonomous human compact. It passed 31 for, 16 against. The 16 against were to a civilization, the ones who had voted loudest for expulsion, the ones who had calculated, based on every previous expulsion in Council history, that cutting Earth off would produce stagnation and eventual collapse, and that within 5 years we would be back at their table asking for the terms of re-entry. They had not been wrong about the math. They had been wrong about what Earth would do when left outside. The official communiqué from the Council arrived 3 days after the session. It was long, formally structured, and used the phrase mutual benefit 4 times in the first 2 pages. It expressed the Council's sincere interest in establishing a productive framework for dialogue. It acknowledged the significant developments in human space with what I thought was admirable restraint. And on page 4, in a clause that had clearly been argued over at length before being left in, it described the expulsion as a regrettable misunderstanding born of the pressures of a complex diplomatic moment. A regrettable misunderstanding. I read it twice. Then I took a photograph of that clause and sent it to my mother. She replied with a voice memo that was 15 seconds of laughing, and then the call dropped. I played it 3 times. That night I was alone in my office with the construction activity moving outside. The window in the dark, running lights, tracing slow arcs across the distance. And I pulled up the archive footage from the expulsion session. I had not watched it since the day it happened. I watched Counselor Breen read the charges. I watched Veth rise and build his case piece by piece, certain and unhurried. I watched myself set the screen face down on the table. I watched the moment I smiled. And I watched Veth's face when I said, "Yeah, okay." In the room, I had not let myself look at it. I had been focused on staying steady on the walk to the door, on not giving them anything in my expression that they could use as evidence of distress. But on the recording, I could pause it. I could go back. I went back. I paused it on Veth's face. What was on? It was not what I had expected. It was not surprise. It was not anger. It was not confusion at the brevity of my response. It was the expression of someone who has just recognized something they hoped they would not have to recognize. Recalibration. A very fast, very private adjustment in which a person realizes that the thing they were certain about is not the thing that is actually in the room with them. They had known. Some part of them had known even then, and they had voted anyway because they had bet that knowing would not be enough. I closed the file, filed it, moved on. 4 years and 2 months after the expulsion, the Autonomous Human Compact's formal counter-proposal to the Galactic Council's request for Earth's re-entry into the governance framework was 312 pages long, had been reviewed by 47 independent legal specialists from 9 different civilizations, and had been personally revised by me 6 times in the last 2 weeks. The last revision taking place at 11:40 at night in my office with a cup of tea I had forgotten was hot and burned the inside of my lip on. The council had 48 hours to respond. Lana Ford had been running our negotiation team for 8 months. She was the kind of negotiator who made the other side feel heard, and then when they checked their notes afterward, realized they had agreed to everything. She came in wanting. She had spent 3 sleepless days in the final revision sprint and had consumed enough coffee to qualify as a geological event, and she sat across from me the morning we submitted the proposal with the expression of someone who has put down something extremely heavy and is deciding whether to feel relief or just fall asleep. "It is a good document," she said. "It is a very good document," I said. "There is one line that the council is going to argue about." "I know," I said. The line was on page 219, in a section titled Conditions for Member Civilization Governance. Participation. I had written it myself. I had written it at 2:00 in the morning during the 3rd revision, And unlike most things written at 2:00 in the morning, it had looked better in daylight, not worse. I had kept it through 5 more revisions, and it was still there. The line read, "No member civilization may be expelled, suspended, or sanctioned on the grounds of being difficult to understand, unpredictable in method, or non-standard in its approach to problem solving, where the civilization in question demonstrably produces outcomes that benefit the broader galactic community." That was it. One sentence, no elaboration, no footnote. It did not need one. Ambassador Veth arrived at the station 4 days later for the formal negotiation session. He came alone, without the full chorale diplomatic apparatus which I had been told to expect, and which I understood to mean the council wanted this conversation to feel less like a negotiation and more like 2 parties finding their way to a reasonable arrangement. I respected the move. I had made similar ones. I met him in the conference room I had designed. The chairs were the right height, the ceiling was a reasonable height, there was a working vending machine in the corner stocked with items from every compact member civilization. He looked around the room when he entered, not with assessment, with something closer to attention, taking it in. "You designed this room," he said. "I had some opinions about chairs," I said. He looked at the vending machine. I said, "Have you ever had coffee?" He looked at me. "I am familiar with the concept." "That is not the same thing," I said. And I got up and went to the machine and came back with 2 cups and put one in front of him. He looked at it. His 6 arms shifted slightly, the way they did when he was deciding something. Then he picked it up and drank. I watched his face. He processed it in 3 phases that I will spend the rest of my life cataloging. The first phase was the temperature, which clearly surprised him. The second phase was the bitterness, which made 2 of his arms move in an involuntary gesture I had never seen before. The third phase was something else entirely, something that came in slowly, like a signal taking time to arrive, and settled across his expression as something between recognition and adjustment. He set the cup down. "That is a significant experience," he said. "Yes," I said, "it is." "Is it meant to be this bitter?" "You get used to it," I said, "then you stop being able to imagine mornings without it." He looked at the cup for a moment, then he looked at me. "Page 219, he said. "Page 219, I said. "The council will argue about the language." "I know. They will say it is too broad, that it creates conditions that cannot be objectively assessed. They are welcome to propose revised language," I said. "Our team will review it, but the principle stays." Veth was quiet. Outside the conference room window, construction lights tracked slow arcs across the dark. The compact's residential section was going up on the station's outer ring, designed to accommodate 3 different atmospheric preferences simultaneously, which our engineering team had solved in a way that Petra Crane had described as inelegant but completely correct, which was, I had come to understand, the highest compliment she gave. "The council has not modified a foundational governance clause in 60 years, Veth said. "I know," I said. "The civilization that asks for one is usually in a considerably weaker position than the one that grants it." "Ambassador," I said, "look out, that window and tell me which civilization in this room you think is in the weaker position. He looked out the window. He looked at it for a long time. When he turned back, his expression had done the thing it did when he was allowing himself to say something true, rather than something diplomatic. The council would like Earth to come back, he said, not the Earth that left, the Earth that is here now. Good, I said, because the Earth that left is not coming back. The formal signing took place 6 days later. The chamber was a real one this time, built for the purpose, with real chairs at a real table and 17 cameras from 14 different civilizations, and a viewing gallery that was at capacity 40 minutes before the session began. Lena O'Ford sat to my right. Owen Dale sat to my left, exactly where he had been 4 years and 2 months ago, in a room where the chairs were too tall, and the decision had already been made. The council accepted 73% of the counter proposal. The specific language of page 219 remained unchanged. The defense cooperation clauses required modification. The trade corridor access terms were adjusted in ways that Lena had anticipated and pre-negotiated fallback positions for, which is why our team had gone into the session with 47 contingency responses prepared and used 22 of them. It was not everything we had asked for. 27% of the counter proposal was declined, deferred, or sent to a joint working group that would spend the next 18 months arguing about it. I had read every decline clause. I had filed them in a new folder. Next round. Our team celebrated that evening in the station's main common area, which someone had decorated with lights and which smelled like 11 different species. Food being prepared simultaneously, which was one of my favorite things about the compact. Lena Ford laughed more in that hour than I had seen her laugh in 8 months of working together. Greg Ash gave a speech that was longer than it needed to be and funnier than I expected it to be. Dr. Petra Crane arrived late, looked around the room, poured herself a drink, and stood in the corner looking at her own tablet for 20 minutes before anyone could convince her to put it away. I stayed for most of it. I ate something that one of the compact's non-human member delegations had brought, which tasted like roasted pine needles and charcoal and was, against all reasonable expectation, wonderful. I talked to people I had been working beside for 2 years and would keep working beside. I let it be a good evening. Then I went back to my office. Owen found me there an hour later. The construction lights were still moving. Outside the window, the new residential section was getting its outer frame. Slow and steady in the dark, enormous and patient. I had my tea, which this time I had remembered was hot and was letting cool to a reasonable temperature before touching it. Owen sat down across from me. He was quiet for a moment, which was not his natural state, which meant he was deciding how to say something. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You are going to ask me something regardless." "When it happened," he said, "when we were in the chamber and the vote came in, what were you actually thinking when you smiled before you said anything?" I had been asked versions of this question before, by journalists, by diplomats, by 2 separate documentary film crews who had been following the compact's development for the last year. I had given each of them something truthful and partial and sufficient. I thought about what to give Owen. Owen, who had been in that chamber, who had been in the corridor after trying to understand 2 words and a smile, who had been in every room since taking notes and catching falling glasses and building the kind of institutional knowledge that keeps things running when the person whose name is on the door is somewhere else trying to hold something together. I thought about the drawer, about Petra Crane arriving with a thermos and a tablet full of papers that had been waiting 20 years for someone to say go, about the FTL corridors that we were not supposed to build and the research we were not supposed to run in the compact we were not supposed to need, about 3 civilizations who voted no in a room of 47 and whose files I had quietly kept current for months before I was ready to make contact, about Veth's face when he drank coffee for the first time, processing it in 3 phases, about my mother's laugh in a voice memo that cut off at 15 seconds, about 47 delegations in tiered seats who had calculated, based on every available precedent, that the cost of expulsion would be borne entirely by the expelled. They had been correct about math. They had not been correct about us. I thought, I said, about a drawer. Owen waited. Not literally, I said, a drawer full of things we were not allowed to use, 40 years of papers and proposals and ideas that our researchers had written down and filed away because the cost of acting on them was always calculated as too high. I looked out the window at the construction lights. When Veth said we were cast out forever, the word I heard was not forever, the word I heard was out. Because out meant the drawer was open. Out meant the ceiling was gone. Out meant every restriction they had ever placed on what we were allowed to build or study or attempt was, as of that exact moment, no longer anything except a piece of paper no one was required to sign anymore. Owen was quiet. They thought expulsion was a punishment, I said, and for every civilization that had ever been expelled in the history of the Council, it was, because every previous expelled civilization spent the following years trying to get back in. All their energy, all their resources pointed at the door they had been pushed out of. But we did not try to get back in. Owen said, we were never trying to get back in. I said, we were waiting to be pushed out. Owen sat with that. Outside the window, the construction lights kept moving, slow and steady, the outer frame of something large and permanent taking shape in the dark. When you said about the scissors, Owen said, you told me to give it about a year. It took 2 years and 8 months, I said. What does it mean, though, the scissors? I thought about the vending machine wrapper, about my mother's voice cutting off mid-laugh, about page 219 of a document that the most powerful governing body in known space had agreed to sign. My mother used to say, I said, that the most dangerous thing you can do to a person who is used to making things is tell them they cannot make things, because what they hear is not a prohibition. What they hear is a challenge, and the thing they build in response to being told no is always bigger and stranger and more alive than anything they would have built if you had simply let them be. I picked up my tea. It had cooled to exactly the right temperature. They handed us the scissors, I said, because they wanted us to feel the loss of running. And instead we sat down and built something that could run on its own. Owen looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked out the window at the Construction lights. What is in the 27%? He said. I smiled. The same smile, my mother's smile. One that belonged in hospital corridors. And 2 tall chairs in rooms where someone was explaining why something could not be done. The interesting part, I said. I picked up my folder of declined clauses. I set it on the desk between us. Outside the window the lights kept moving, patient and certain, building something the council had not anticipated and could not now stop. Out in the dark where the drawer had finally been opened and everything that had ever been told to wait was now quietly and completely running. We got to work.